I used to believe evil wore a mask you could spot across a crowded room, but the worst kind dresses like family and smiles while it sharpens the knife. 3 days ago, my father flew my grandfather across an ocean on what he called a memory trip and left him in a foreign city with no wallet. No phone, no passport, just the Atlantic wind and a promise that sounded like a curse. "You've had enough. Old man," he whispered at the gate. And in that moment, I learned betrayal can be spoken softly and still echo like thunder. My name is Olivia Hart, and the men in my life have always been measured by tides, the one who built his fortune by reading the water, and the one who thought he could skim it forever without paying the weather back. Grandpa Theodore Hart rose from a rusted pier with rope-burned hands and a chess player's patience, the kind that turns bottle caps and chalk lines into strategy. My father Richard was the kind of charming efficiency people applaud at airports, the man who could talk a gate agent into rearranging the weather while his smile folded the world into his pocket. At SeaTac, he squeezed Grandpa's shoulder and said, "One last trip before we redo your study. Pop, you'll love Lisbon, the azulejos, the sardines." And he threw me a wink I had stopped trusting since the day we buried my mother. Lisbon gleamed like wet stone under January light, and for a while I let myself believe in the postcard. We walked cobblestones slick with rain while Grandpa told me how he hauled rope at 14, how dock workers taught him patience with a bottle cap and chalk, how the sea will accept any man but only honor the ones who understand the cost. Dad laughed in all the right places and volunteered to handle the passports at the hotel, so Pop doesn't lose them. And even the concierge smiled like we were ordinary Americans chasing sunshine. On the third day, near the Belém Tower, he said, "Pop needs a nap. Let's split. Olivia, grab us some pastés. I'll take Pop to the hotel." Grandpa squeezed my hand and whispered, "Go on, kiddo. Bring 3. And the river smelled metallic and sweet, as if the city itself was holding its breath. By the time I returned with warm paper boxes fogging at the seams, the concierge's smile had tightened into a line. "No, Ms. Hart, no. Mr. Hart," she said, tapping a screen that reflected my face back at me like a mistake. The room keys were deactivated, the passports already checked out, my chest iced over. I called my father again and again. The calls fell straight into a quiet so sturdy it felt planned. I counted 10 breaths in, 10 out, the way Grandpa had taught me to do in storms. And then I did the thing my family has always called meddling, and he privately called backbone. I moved the police, the U.S. consulate, and a small interview room that hummed under fluorescent lights taught me more about choice than a lifetime of dinner table negotiations. Patricia, the consular officer with a neat stack of forms and eyes that missed nothing, asked the question I had been swallowing, "Has your father ever tried to take your grandfather's assets?" My mouth opened to deny and found only salt. When the emergency passport was ready, Patricia slid a second envelope across the table like an oath. "He asked us to give you this when you came," she said, and in Grandpa's blocky script I read 4 words that felt like a life-preserver olive branch. Olive. Follow the list. He had anticipated the storm and left me a chart. Call Maya. The note read, "Tell her to open the folder named Blue Harbor." On a crowded morning street, I called my best friend Maya, junior associate at Litton and Ames, and listened to keystrokes that sounded like a fuse being lit. "Liv?" she breathed. What a sting. Grandpa had recorded meetings with the notary my father used for hush-hush tune-ups, documented debts I had only heard whispered about, logged emails to real estate agents asking for valuations on the Bellevue mansion dated 6 weeks before the alleged gift. He'd set a tripwire and named a federal contact to call if my father moved him across borders without his phone or wallet. Why me, I asked, dodging umbrellas in disbelief. Because he wanted you on record making the choice, Maya said, and the word cut because it was true. Patricia smiled like a co-conspirator when I returned to the consulate. Your grandfather's car is waiting, she said. Driver knows the house. He will be where he needs to be. On the flight home, I read Blue Harbor end to end. Each entry a measured tide mark. Ours charm, masks rot. Love loves shortcuts, hates the slow dignity of work. Somewhere over the Atlantic, my phone lit with a number-tagged pearl. Grandpa land, swap cars, enter through garden. He'll try the front first, leave the door on latch, recording on. I typed, what's the surprise? The bubble blinked. Then justice that's also mercy, the hardest kind. Seattle rain smelled like iron and second chances. At the Bellevue mansion, camellias nodded along the brick walk like gossipers. When my father pushed open the front door in his immaculate charcoal coat, expecting an empty kingdom. Grandpa was there dry and smiling, the cane knocking once against marble. Oh, you're back, he said, the softness in his voice harder than steel. I have a surprise for you. My father froze in the doorway, rain dripping from his collar, surprise breaking across his face like a bad actor caught between lines. What? How he stammered. Grandpa's smile didn't waver. You're back, he said gently. I have a surprise for you. That was all. Just a statement that landed heavier than any accusation could. Dad tried to shape concern onto his face, the same way he knotted a tie. We were sick. Pop. Food poisoning. We thought you'd had enough travel. His eyes flicked to me, sharp, assessing. You shouldn't be here. Olivia. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, but I kept my voice calm. If you use the word misunderstanding, I said evenly, I'll record over it with the truth. Aunt Claire stepped forward from behind him, lacquered and perfumed, a shadow of the family's old parties. You don't speak to your father like that. Grandpa's cane tapped once against the marble. My house. Claire. My rules. I lifted my phone, its red recording light glinting like a warning. Washington's a two-party consent state. I said, I'm informing you both this is being recorded. Dad's jaw tightened. You can't lock a legal owner out of his property. About that, I said, and gestured to the console table where a stack of papers waited under a silver tugboat paperweight. Motion to invalidate deed of gift on grounds of fraud and undue influence, filed this morning. I lifted another page, my hand steady now. And these are copies of emails you sent to Sable Realty and Nordland Homes asking for market analyses of this address before the so-called gift. Aunt Claire's composure cracked like porcelain. Richard, she whispered. But Dad silenced her with a glance sharp enough to draw blood. Grandpa's voice softened, almost kind. Richard, when did you start hating the way I built things? Was it the first time I told you no? My father didn't blink. You never saw me, he said. You saw labor, markets, ships. You saw a replacement for yourself. His tone rose, trembling at the edges. I brought you to Lisbon to remember who you were, and you punished me for it. I stepped closer. Lisbon, where you took his passport and left him behind. He shrugged. A brittle spasm. He got home. Grandpa nodded once. I did. And because I did, you get the mercy part. The sound of tires grinding wet gravel sliced through the silence. 3 cars rolled into the drive, a sedan, an SUV, and a black Suburban that gleamed like the law itself. Dad's eyes darted toward the window just as the door opened. Mr. Hart, said a woman with steady eyes and a government badge, Assistant U.S., Attorney Haynes. This is Detective Willis from King County. She turned politely to my father and Aunt Claire. We'll need you both to stay in the foyer while we serve paperwork. The air thickened. Haynes handed Grandpa a folder, then looked at my father. Per your counsel's request and our preliminary review of the recordings in Blue Harbor, we're here to preserve evidence. No arrests today, but we'll be taking statements and collecting Mr. Sloane's notary files. Her voice was measured, like a clock ticking toward judgment. We'll also advise everyone present about exposure. Exposure, Aunt Claire repeated faintly, like she was tasting a foreign word. Haynes's tone never wavered. Elder financial exploitation, attempted fraud, international abandonment with intent to defraud. My father laughed under his breath, the kind of laugh that hoped to rewrite the moment. You have no proof, he said. Grandpa's cane tapped twice. Open the study, he told me. We moved together like ritual. The study smelled of cedar and old ink. On the desk sat a hard drive labeled Harbor Cut. Haynes's tech plugged it in, and video flickered to life a Starbucks hum, the hiss of steaming milk. My father's voice smooth, practiced. It's a medical update. Pop, standard boilerplate. Just sign there. Then the faint sound of cash counting, a notary muttering about off-site convenience. Haynes didn't gloat. She simply nodded. Timestamp logged. She turned to Dad. We'll need those real estate emails as well. Printed, said a voice from the doorway. Maya, hair damp from the rain, eyes bright with quiet fire, crossed the room and laid down a stack labeled Exhibits A through F. I'd never been so grateful for a friend. My father looked at me like I'd set the trap myself. You think this makes you noble? No, I said softly. It makes me responsible. His smile curdled. Then be responsible for the consequences. He turned on his heel and left, Aunt Claire trailing in a storm of perfume and denial. The house exhaled the silence they left behind. Grandpa let out a long breath, the kind that comes after weathering a storm at sea. I felt tears sting my eyes, not from victory, but from the weight of it all. Litigation, I whispered, is a kind of weather, isn't it? Grandpa smiled faintly. It is. Pressure rises. Skies darken. People make bad decisions in pouring rain. The war wasn't over, only the first battle. And by nightfall, we'd turned the guest room into our own command post files stacked like sandbags, timelines pinned across the walls, the Blue Harbor Drive at the center, pulsing with every breath. The weeks that followed blurred into a strange rhythm of coffee, court filings, and the quiet dread that comes from realizing the enemy shares your blood. Margaret Chen. Yes, the Margaret Chen. The attorney whispered about in downtown lobbies took our case. We're not asking for damages, she told us, setting her silver pen down with surgical precision. We're asking for certainty. Grandpa nodded like a man signing on to weather. She filed for a temporary restraining order, barring my father from entering the property, liquidating heirlooms, or contacting the house staff. Dad retaliated in style, hiring Robert Michaels, a lawyer who liked Latin phrases and the sound of his own pauses. He painted Grandpa as a mercurial patriarch, me as a manipulative granddaughter with outsized influence, and the charitable trust as a cruel bypass of filial duty. Aunt Claire took her battle to social media, posting a photo of herself with teary eyes and the caption, "When elders are manipulated, families suffer." Comments bloomed like mildew. At home. The guest room became a war room. Maya's handwriting covered whiteboards. Receipts lived in plastic sleeves. I printed emails at 2 a.m., highlighting timestamps until my fingers stained yellow. Sometimes I'd look up and see Grandpa at the stove, moving slowly, stirring soups that tasted like calm. You should rest, he'd tell me. I'd laugh, hollow. You first. One night, he set a bowl in front of me and said, "You know, I used to think money made men decent. It doesn't. It just makes them louder." I stared at him, spoon halfway to my mouth. Do you regret the trust he considered it? Long and quiet? No. I regret not teaching your father the difference between inheritance and legacy. I frowned. Is there a difference? He smiled, weary and kind. An inheritance is something you get. A legacy is something you become. I tucked that sentence into my chest like a bandage. When our hearing was scheduled, I barely slept. King County Superior Court Department 12 smelled like polish and nerves. Dad wouldn't look at me. Aunt Claire sat beside him in a pale suit like frosted bone, her phone face down but still buzzing. Our row looked small but steady Grandpa in his navy cardigan, Margaret and Maya beside us, a paralegal with 1,000 tabs open. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to count every second we'd waited for this. Robert Michaels began with theatrical solemnity. "Your Honor," he said, "the plaintiff will attempt to weave melodrama from family misunderstanding, but a deed is a deed. This was a father's voluntary act, a gift born of affection." Margaret rose, calm as the tide. "A deed procured by deceit is not a deed," she said. "The evidence shows misrepresentation, improper notarization, premeditated valuation requests, and international abandonment designed to create possession. This is not melodrama, it is pattern." Her voice didn't rise, it simply filled the room. We called the notary first. Sloan smelled of nervous cologne and regret. Under oath, his story cracked at the edges. Mr. Richard Hart said his father had mobility issues. He muttered. Margaret's eyebrow arched. "Did he? Well, he walked in under his own power. How much were you paid?" $300. "Is that standard?" "No, ma'am. Standard's $25. Margaret didn't smile. "Thank you." Michaels tried to cross-examine him back into coherence, but the video of cash being counted in a coffee shop spoke louder than words. Then it was my turn. My palms were slick when I placed them on the witness stand. Margaret's voice was soft but clear. "Olivia, walk us through what happened in Lisbon." I told them everything, the concierge's tight smile, Patricia's envelope, the note that said olive branch. Follow the list. I told them what it felt like opening Blue Harbor, seeing my family's sins laid out like accounting. I didn't say betrayal wrapped in love. I said clarity. Michaels pounced on that. "You dislike your father, don't you?" I swallowed. "I love my father," I said. "That's why this hurts." His tone sharpened. "And yet you involved federal agents. I followed my grandfather's instructions. And when I believed a crime had occurred, I reported it. That's not betrayal. That's conscience." I could feel Grandpa watching me, his silence steady as a dock piling. When Dad took the stand, he looked older, still handsome, but hollowed. Michaels guided him gently. "Why Lisbon, Mr. Hart?" "He loves the ocean," Dad said smoothly. "I wanted to give him memories. The deed, his idea. He wanted to secure my future." Margaret approached, papers in hand. "Mr. Hart. Which came first, the valuation emails or the alleged gift?" He hesitated. "I don't recall." She slid a page forward. "Exhibit D. Your request to Sable Realty dated March 3rd. The deed of gift dated March 26th. "Correct." His throat worked. "Yes. And you told the notary your father had mobility issues. That was a misunderstanding." Margaret's tone didn't change. "And in Lisbon, who possessed your father's passports?" I did. "When you left the hotel? Where were those passports?" His silence answered. "On me," she said softly. No further questions. I waited for anger to feel like victory. It didn't. The judge, Honorable Patricia Morrison, leaned forward. "This court will rule on the deed. As to the trust, absent evidence of incapacity or undue influence." She paused, her gaze flicking briefly toward me. "This court sees a valid charitable instrument. Arguments about filial duty belong at dinner tables, not in equity." Michaels objected. "Latin and heat." It went nowhere. Her ruling landed like a gavel striking iron. Deed void for fraud and undue influence. Possession remains with Theodore Hart. Defendant is restrained from the premises, absent invitation. The gavel fell again, and for a heartbeat, everything stopped. Dad exhaled through a smile that wasn't a smile. Aunt Claire stared at the floor, and I realized justice, when it arrives, doesn't roar, it sighs. I thought that was the end, that the gavel was the last word, that we'd walk out of that courtroom lighter. But justice isn't the same as peace. Peace is quieter, slower. It takes work to arrive, and it doesn't always stay when you open the door. 2 nights after the ruling, Grandpa called me into the study. He was standing by the window, moonlight caught in the lines of his face. "Turn to the last page," he said, sliding me a weathered ship's log bound in cracked leather. His handwriting marched neatly across the paper. "If Richard ever tries to take what isn't his, give him the thing he thinks he wants. Give him the company." I frowned. Grandpa. What he smiled, soft and sad. He wanted the house and the shine. He never wanted the work. So I gave him the work. The next morning, he dressed in his navy cardigan and said simply, "Come with me." The drive to the docks smelled of diesel and salt, the sky a heavy gray. At Hart Maritime Headquarters, board members waited, men and women with weather-creased faces. People who had known my grandfather since rope burns were his signature. Dad arrived 10 minutes late, coat crisp, expression a mix of defiance and confusion. "What fresh theater is this?" he asked. Grandpa set a folder on the table between them. "The CEO seat," he said. "If you want a legacy, build one, and prove it." Dad laughed, a dry, nervous sound, until he saw the documents. The company was a tangle of contracts, insurance audits, union reports, and razor-thin margins. "You made it look bad," he said. Grandpa's eyes didn't flinch. "It is hard. It always was. I hid the strain so you could learn love before labor, but you learned contempt instead." Dad shoved the papers away. "I won't be tested like a child. Then stop acting like one." Grandpa's tone softened, like tidewater easing back to shore. "Here is the mercy. Richard, take the job for 6 months. Work with a union mentor, a compliance monitor, earn a salary, pay your debts. Learn what it means to keep men safe in weather." Dad's mouth twisted. "Is this what you call love?" Grandpa looked at him for a long moment. "It's what I call hope." Silence stretched until Dad reached for the folder, his jaw tight. He didn't say another word, just left. The door clicking shut behind him. Those 6 months were the longest of our lives. The headlines about the case faded. Aunt Claire went quiet online. Grandpa and I worked side by side in the house, restoring what mattered. I'd see my father's name occasionally in company reports, meeting attended, inspection approved, incident resolved. He missed things, at first forgot forms, barked orders, tried shortcuts. But slowly, the pattern changed. He began showing up early. He stopped gambling, paid down 2 cards. I'd get brief updates through Maya, who was now handling compliance audits for Hart Maritime. "He's trying," she'd say, and I wanted to believe her. Then Thanksgiving came. The house smelled like cinnamon and salt air, the kind of scent that feels like history forgiving you just a little. Rain whispered against the windows when the doorbell rang. Grandpa looked at me. "Answer it." Dad stood on the porch, holding his old navy cap in both hands. He looked smaller somehow, like life had stripped away the armor. "I can't undo Lisbon," he said quietly, "but I can try to be a man your grandfather would hire." I opened the door, the air cold between us. "You burned the bridge." I told him. "You can cross it anyway on your knees." He nodded once, no protest, and stepped inside. We weren't healed, not yet, but the work had begun. In the weeks that followed, Dad met with the scholarship committee, the one funded by the trust he once tried to steal. He wrote a check for restitution to the staff whose hours he'd cut. The assistant U.S. attorney, Haynes, called to tell us she'd offered him a pre-charge diversion, conditioned on restitution and 6 months of verifiable company service. "We prefer redemption to trophies," she said, and I believed her. That winter, Grandpa and I planted pansies along the walkway, our breath clouding in the cold. "What did you become today?" "Olive," he asked, as he had since I was a child. I thought of my father's bowed head, of Aunt Claire's silence, of the smell of docks in December iron, salt, and second chances. "Someone who knows the difference between inheritance and legacy," I said softly, "and someone who can forgive without forgetting." Grandpa smiled, tipping a rook over with one finger. "Checkmate," he murmured, "is only beautiful if the other player gets up and shakes your hand." That evening, the bell rang again. Dad stood there in the rain, tired but steady. "I heard about the scholarships," he said. "I'm here to write a check." Grandpa smiled faintly. "Write it to work," he said. Dad nodded. "That's all I've been writing lately." I stepped aside this time. The house felt different, warmer, lighter, like it was finally breathing again. Sometimes mercy isn't weakness. It's the kind of justice that builds instead of breaks, the kind that asks you to stay when leaving would be easier. My grandfather taught me that legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you repair before you go. If you found this story moving, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories that linger long after they end. And tell me in the comments, what does legacy mean to you?